Hi, welcome back to the Culture Chronicles. My name's Kate Ball. I'm your host and resident bullshit exorcist. Now, today we're talking with one of my favorite ex-Amazonians because not only was Anna my mentor when we worked together, but also she led one of the most visible parts of the business that touched all 1.6 million employees. Now, too often, ERGs, in my opinion, are dismissed as feel-good extras. They're untapped engines of culture, innovation, and retention, though. So in this episode, we're going to sit down with Anna, who is known across the industry as the godmother of ERGs, to unpack why it's long past time to give these groups the budget, the backing, and the strategic voice that they deserve. From proven governance models to the power of proper funding and executive alignment, we explore how to transform ERGs from side-of-desk passion projects like they were for me into core drivers of organizational belonging and business impact. So if your company still treats ERGs like an afterthought, this is your wake-up call. So hi, Anna. Want to introduce yourself?
Hello. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you, Kate. I appreciate the invitation. I am Anna Ettin. I am the co-founder of Tapestry Partner Solutions and co-owner of the Global ERG Network. Tapestry Partner Solutions is focused on transforming organizations and focusing on people first work and starting with the human at the center of all we do. And the Global ERG Network, as it is named, is focused on really enabling ERGs and organizations to tap into this incredible power that we're going to talk about today. So I'm super excited to get into it with you.
Awesome. So I mentioned in my intro, I've seen firsthand, though I've not been working in the field as long as you have, that oftentimes companies can overlook or disregard the value that ERGs bring. So what do you think it is that's driving that? Why are they treated as extracurriculars as opposed to the central point of culture?
It is often just a lack of understanding of the depth and breadth of impact that ERGs have both on individuals and an organization. And we know that storytelling is what changes hearts and minds. It's one of the reasons that we're here today. And often that's what it takes to help organizations understand the power of ERGs. And so what that looks like is an individual talking about a moment in time where, I was a new parent returning to the workplace, and the ERG provided a connection point, a lifeline for me that helped me feel not alone in the workplace. Or it was, I needed resources for a project that I was working on, and I met these really amazing people through the ERG, and we created something brilliant together. So the storytelling at an individual level is really important to help organizations understand. But there is also work that we do with ERGs and to talk about the scale of the work that they're doing and how do we tell a quantitative story in addition to qualitative about the impact of ERGs. So I think for most organizations, it's just a lack of understanding.
And so I referenced in your intro, you've been called the godmother of ERGs. Obviously, I know your background, but not everybody else does. Do you want to just give some insight into where that moniker came from?
Sure. So most explicitly, it was given to me by the head of inclusive experiences and technology at Amazon. And so I was very excited to take that role 6 years ago and spend a couple of years in such a powerful time in our particularly U.S. history in working with these employee groups. And so, yeah, the Cliffs Notes version of this background, I came to ERGs in 2007. Bank of America. I was a couple of years into my career there and was working as a call center manager, was looking for some way to get connected and helped to launch a chapter of the women's leadership group at that organization in my local call center. And then as the hand raiser I am, quickly volunteered to do a little bit more to help orchestrate for the national board. And really never looked back. I spent about 5 years building the infrastructure of the Women's Leadership Group at Bank of America. Had the privilege to, for instance, work with Merrill Lynch and Countrywide when those companies were acquired. And we had 3 women's groups that we brought together. and had to think about the legacy and the experiences of these groups and how to merge them. In 2012, I had the great opportunity to co-found and launch the Intergenerational Employee Network at Bank of America, and led that organization for 6 years, grew it to 25 chapters and 25,000 employees across the world, and focused on tapping into the generational dynamics in the workplace. And at the time, it was all about the millennials. Now we are having the same conversations and talking about Gen Z. And so I was an ERG leader myself. I grew up, per se, in my ERG leadership role. I spent more than a decade leading groups as a volunteer, and then eventually came into a role at Bank of America as building out the program team for ERGs. And so I spent 2 years there building software and programs for the groups, eventually moving into the Amazon opportunity in 2019. So that is a scale all its own. We went from 200 chapters to more than 2,000 around the world, and still growing every day.
And I remember talking to you on like your second day.
Yeah.
I witnessed a lot of that growth, although obviously I left about 2.5, 3 years before you did. But what have you learned over the years then about what makes an ERG thrive? And also, conversely, what causes them to stall?
Yeah. I mean, people are the power of ERGs. They thrive on the attention, the dedication, the energy of the volunteers and people who are willing to raise their hands to do this work, as you well know, having helped build and launch a phenomenal ERG. So I'll let you tell as much of your story as you want to, but it is hard work. I mean, growing a volunteer organization can be hard work, and ERG leaders are we're not each other's bosses. No one's each other's manager. It is bringing together essentially a group of strangers often, and people that have a shared and common interest, a goal of some sort for their community, for their peers. And the group becomes as much as it can from the energy and efforts of those individuals. And so the real power is the people. Now, from an organizational perspective, organizations can fast forward that power by understanding and recognizing the value. And so the obstacles I often see are lack of funding, which I'm sure we'll talk about, lack of strategic support and understanding of the value. And I'll give you a pointed, for instance. So with the Intergenerational Employee Network, we knew right out of the gate that this had incredible implications across Bank of America in the way that we worked with customers, clients, et cetera. But we had to help our business leaders understand that. We knew that. But I mean, I couldn't just change the way we managed wealth management or change the way we did customer service training around the world. That wasn't within my power as an ERG leader. And so we looked at very explicit cases and said, this is how this will work for you. For instance, credit card call center manager. Most of your employees are 20 to 25 years old and have never used a credit card. And they're working with customers who are 25-year credit card. Like they don't have the lived experience. So what should we be doing differently to create a different conversation and relationship? And when they saw that explicit case and could say, we would see the light bulbs start to come on. And so that is what I coach ERGs to do, to help get through some of those roadblocks with their business leaders. Now, there are certainly organizations that just that don't understand or care about their employees as their most valuable asset. And that's a whole other kind of organizational structure that we can't unpack today, right? I mean, that's another challenge, another podcast, another day. But for companies that value their employees and value the time, energy that they've spent to train and hire and skill and work with people and want to retain them, ERGs are their most valuable asset.
So I'm going to take us on a bit of a tangent, but at the same time, I think it makes sense here. So one of the most persistent challenges that I've heard, at least, and I think is most common for ERGs to face, is that they're often led by really passionate volunteers, But those people, like you mentioned, are doing that work on the side of their desk. They're doing it on top of their day jobs. So what's your take on the model? How can companies justify compensating or rewarding that extra labor without creating kind of a hierarchy or inequity?
Yeah, it's a really fantastic question and hotly debated within the ERG industry per se. There are a couple of organizations that announced in the last 5 years or so that they were beginning to compensate ERG leaders in some form or fashion. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I also don't always think it's a good thing. And I'll unpack that for a moment. And so, having been an ERG leader, there were times where I was putting in as many hours for my ERG as I was for my day job. For me, that was a choice that I made. I, for instance, wasn't involved at the time in an external civic organization. So for me, my ERG was my civic organization. It was my community engagement, my involvement. And so I was willing, eager, and able to pour that much time and energy. And so I don't want to suggest that that's how everyone who leads or works with ERGs should. There's a lot of room in ERGs for folks that have an hour or two a month to contribute something. But for me, it was a lot of time and energy spent. And so I was able to help my business leader understand at one point in time that it was worth the time, that the expertise I was building, the skills I was building, the knowledge I was building were all transferable, and they were all useful in my quote day job. And ERG leaders often hear, this is not what we're paying you for. Be careful where you spend your time and energy. Day job comes first. And yes, and there are skills that are developed in the ERG when people dedicate their time and energy that are useful to them as individuals, to the organization. What happens with a compensation model, when it's suggested, it is often very limited in one or two roles within an ERG, whereas the committees tend to be much larger. So if you've got, for instance, a president or a co-president of an ERG, they're the single person typically getting compensation. Whereas there might be 10, 15, 20, even more people on the board who are giving just as much time and energy, sharing their ideas, sharing their expertise in really, really meaningful ways. So it can inadvertently create an inequity in a space that was designed to create equity. And so depending on the way the model plays, that can be a little bit of a challenge. I've seen some great reward and recognition models where ERG leaders themselves are given ways to recognize the volunteers, or people in my roles, like a program manager was given a budget of some sort to provide recognition to really outstanding ERG leaders. And that tends to be a great model because it is a recognition, it is a reward, and those are two different things, right? I'm sure you've talked about that somewhere. Reward and recognition are two different things and both important. And so I think there are ways of doing that, but I also think that comes with, and this is back to your original question, because I did not forget, being able to be rewarded and recognized also comes with having a standard of expectations, or a set expectation of contribution. And so similar to, if I'm volunteering at a local community center or my kid's school, or, if I'm a faith-based group or something like that, I'm going to sign up for a job. And if I'm not doing that job, then I'm letting somebody down somewhere. And the impact of that is highly variable. It may be that I'm just letting a committee of my peers down and not following through with a commitment that I made. It could be that my dropping the ball in my volunteer role impacts somebody's livelihood or life in a way where they don't get the resources they needed. I mean, particularly in community organizations. So, not intending to be hyperbolic, but as a volunteer, it's not sort of just volunteerism. And, it should be fun. ERG should be fun. Lord knows if it's not fun, I don't want to, we shouldn't be spending so much time and energy doing it. It should be enjoyable to be part of an ERG. That doesn't mean it's not work. That doesn't mean we're not going to ask you to make a commitment, to hold to that commitment, to follow through, to hold you accountable if you're dropping the ball on that commitment. because other people are counting on you. And so anyway, you can tell I'm really passionate about this. I've been up, down the wall, and it's been something I've been talking about for 15 years with folks, and I've seen it good, bad, and the ugly.
So let's talk about funding, because I know this is a hot button topic, and particularly in the last couple of years with the political climate changing and things, budgets have been walked back in all areas of DEI, and that's what the ERGs traditionally have seemed to fall under. So, in your opinion, first of all, how should an ERG be funded?
So I believe that there should be a bucket of funding that is given to the ERG that is explicitly for engaging members. And that engagement is going to look a little bit different depending on the company. So for instance, some companies really like swag and t-shirts and mugs and umbrellas and all the stuff. And if that's what builds loyalty for your employees, if that's like, do that. Do more of that, right? And so the ERGs, excuse me, the ERGs can lead your company culture in that way. I mean, they are on the leading edge. They are your most highly engaged employees. And so there's some use of that funding, depends on what the company looks like. It typically, I think you shared, typically ERGs sit within a diversity, equity, and inclusion team or belonging team. Now they are often called people and culture teams. Sometimes they are engagement teams. We're not getting hung up on the language, but they typically sit within HR. And as we know, that's a cost center, right? I mean, HR is not a profit center. And so the budgets that are outlined for ERGs are coming from within that mindset.
Do you think that's the right thing, though?
I don't think DEIB should sit within HR at all. And so that's the maybe more, AF answer, right? Is in an ideal scenario, if there is a DEIB team per se within an organization, that reports directly to the CEO. Because then you're really speaking truth to power across the entire organization. And where HR teams are sometimes the most flagrant violators of their own intended practices, that's important. But barring that, should it come so I think an ideal model is one in which businesses are contributing to a central pool of funding for ERGs. There is often, because the fundraising model breeds inequities. And so, if we have 5 ERGs and let's say we've got women and veterans and a Black employees ERG and Latinos and families, just for throwing out a set. Each of those communities, each of those groups is going to be understood and supported in a different way based on the executives that are paying attention to them and engaging with them, based on the organizational model. So if you're a veterans ERG and a company that has a military team, you're probably going to get a lot of attention. You're going to get a ton of support because the company already cares. It was something they were doing anyway. If you're a veterans ERG in a company that doesn't really care about hiring vets and doesn't have any programs, and that's a different scenario. So I really believe that businesses should be contributing. Now, we can't get into the whole HR funding model itself, but in terms of ERGs, because ERGs extend across business lines, across levels, layers, up, down, across geographies. If I'm a business leader, I want the ERG in my business too. I want my employees to participate. I want them to get the benefits from the ERG, and I'm going to be willing to throw in some cash to help make sure that happens properly. But I want to do that in a way that it is then distributed with some measures of equity, that has a partner that's involved that says, here's how we're going to decide how the money is being spent and where it's allocated.
So let's talk about, because you touched very briefly on things like governments and accountability. Again, as I said, we've seen some drastic changes just in the last 6 months alone, but definitely over the last 5 years. How can you manage from an ERG perspective, if you're an ERG leader, how can you manage upwards to ensure that A, actions are not being performative, just in a response to external factors, and B, to minimize this whiplash that everybody is feeling right now of throw all the money at mental health during a pandemic, now take it all away again because we're all healthy and back at work. Like, how do you mitigate
Are we
that? Just
debatable,
facing
right?
some leaders.
No, no. Point made, though. I mean, yeah. So the climate, the shift. That's a really tough one. I think it is so dependent upon what the organizational climate internally is itself. There are some things that ERG leaders can do to influence that, and other things that are just out of their spectrum of control. And so what I think what ERGs do really well is the storytelling. It is sharing lived experiences and being able to look at the implications. And so one of the ways that I think that happens is when you have mid to senior level leaders, so not your C-suite, but your mid to senior level leaders, folks that have been in an organization for a while, that are respected amongst their peers, when they engage and when they talk about their experiences, are saying being part of this ERG changed me in this way, advising this ERG was meaningful to me because their peers listen to that. If they're people that are already respected and already listened to in the organization, people will listen when they talk about ERGs as well. And so I think it's really important where people are willing and able to speak on behalf of their ERG. I definitely know, for instance, many LGBTQ leaders who ended up sort of coming out in their organizations because they felt the need to speak up on behalf of their ERG. And because they saw something happening, they were part of the ERG. Maybe they were on a mailing list. Maybe they were kind of behind the scenes supporter, but something happened, whether it was external or internal, that made them feel the need to speak up and speak out. And so then they started talking to their peers about the importance. If we can orchestrate that rather than waiting for something terrible to happen, right? If we can do that proactive storytelling, if we can get those mid to senior level leaders to just talk about those experiences anyway. I mean, those are the most phenomenal ERG sponsors and advisors, are the ones who they just weave it into their conversations. It doesn't have to be a special moment. It is just part of who I am and what I do to be part of this ERG.
Okay.
So I think that's how we influence upwards.
So if someone out there is listening to this and they want to make a case to their leadership, or basically they want to incorporate an ERG and they're struggling to get resourcing or formalized support, what are the most compelling metrics or impact stories you would advise them to be sharing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to, in many ways, the broken systems and the main challenges that we are seeing and hearing across the employee life cycle from HR, whether that is recruiting challenges or retention, development, etc. Mostly come from broken systems somewhere that are not sort of starting with the heart of the employee needs or the customer needs. And so I think the most compelling cases are about finding what your business cares about and kind of angling in the human side of that. So if you are a healthcare organization, I work with quite a few very large healthcare hospital systems and healthcare organizations. And one of the most compelling arguments in that industry is the impact to patient care and the quality of treatment that people receive. And that ERGs provide a way, a channel and a voice through employees as customers, through employees as community, as our most valuable asset, that can literally change the life experiences of patients in a hospital. And those are the kinds of compelling arguments. So finding out, it's what does your company already care about? And if you're struggling to get an ERG off the ground, that's the tie-in you've got to make.
Okay. And On the other side of the coin, for companies who are just getting started or they're trying to reinvigorate ERGs that have kind of fallen by the wayside, a lot of layoffs have happened in the last few years. So you've got established leadership that left the business, new leadership struggling to find their feet, mentorship perhaps moving on. What would
All
you say
the
is,
above.
yeah, I'm trying not to say Amazon, but obviously we all know that's kind of in the background. But there are lots of companies facing the same things. You've got your Microsofts, your Googles. There's been so many of the big tech companies, but it's not just the tech companies that have seen this upheaval in the last few years. So what advice would you have for those still on the ground or starting to get involved now that want to reinvigorate an ERG that perhaps has passed its heyday? What's step one? Where do they focus their energy first?
Yeah, I mean, have a strategy. Strategic roadmap is really step one. And the A type of me is like, just throw out an event and get people involved again and see what happens. And there's part of me that's like, just do it. And look, I mean, in some organizations, that is what you should do. Right. So some of this is very much, and for our viewers, our listeners, I'm coming out of two of the largest companies in the world. So the scale is just not reasonable in comparison to what most people are working with. So in some organizations, that is the right thing to do. Like if you had a leadership group, or say you had a women's leadership group and folks have been displaced or moved on and you're trying to reinvigorate, sometimes just throwing out an invitation and seeing who shows up is the right place to start, because you don't know how big you need to build until you know who wants it. I mean, do people even want this group? If you are a larger organization, unfortunately, the impacts of launching something and doing it poorly can be pretty significant. And so, like, Kate, you and I have both seen the impact of like mentoring programs that are done badly. And it's almost worse than not having it at all. And so I don't want to say like don't have ERGs without a strategic plan, but like take a hot minute and make a plan and think about how, if you want to have some rules for your ERGs, put them in place now. Don't wait till later. Yeah. It's so much harder to do later. Like, have a plan.
Yeah, the consistency as well, I think, is a huge thing, because
Yes.
I can only talk to my own experiences within ERGs, but to have somebody really engaged that comes in and for a month they're the loudest voice in the room and they're pushing an agenda, and then things don't go their way and they dip out, your entire audience, your entire community gets burnt out on things like that, broken promises. So it's also important to be really intentional and consistent, I think.
Yeah, and it has to be, to that point. I mean, ERGs are a collective. They are best when they are run by a group of people. It should not be a roller coaster ride that when, this person is president, we're focused on X, but when this person's president, X doesn't matter anymore. Like, we're not even doing X. Nobody's talking about X. Now we're doing Y, Q, and P or whatever. So like it should not be that fluid. And that is jarring for members. It creates a poor experience for folks. And I would say I'm gonna like a tidbit as we're kind of thinking about, we're close to the end. Back to the whole funding question. Like if you don't need any money. If you create a consistent communication, cadence, and connection with your members, that you can do that for free. That looks like inviting people to meet up for breakfast, buy your own breakfast every third Wednesday of the month at the bagel shop right next to the office. It looks like a newsletter on the last Friday of every month with a video message from the president of the chapter. There are so many ways people want to be connected. They want to feel like they're part of something. And there are lots of ways to do that you can do low cost if you build the consistency, cadence, communication, etc. So those are all really important things in the longevity and health of ERGs.
Awesome. And yes, unfortunately, I have to draw us to a close because we're past the 30-minute mark, but you're absolutely right. We could continue having this conversation for hours. I already knew that going in, so I'm sure we will revisit and dive deeper. But any closing thoughts from you?
Just do the thing with ERGs, like give it a shot. Your employees, if they are asking for it, many years ago, when I was a new program manager building out sort of a framework for ERGs. I was talking with a peer in another company, and they had a bunch. And I was like, how did you get all these launched? How did that happen? And she said, we believe that if our employees are asking for it, it's our job to help enable them to create it, not to stand in their way. And so that's the thought I will leave folks with. Try to help enable versus stand in the way.
Love that. Alrighty, everyone. I'm sorry. I would love to continue, but we do have to say goodbye to Anna. So, Anna, thank you for joining us. I know we'll be seeing you again, but really appreciate your insights. Wishing you the best of luck with the Global ERG Network. Anyone that wants to learn more about that or Tapestry Consulting, I'll make sure to share the links. Perfect. And ways to connect on LinkedIn and all of that. But all right, everyone, have a great day. We'll see you again soon. Bye.